Thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop. If you have any questions along the way for our presenter, you can type them into the GoToWebinar chat box, likely found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any tech questions, you can type them there as well. Without further ado, I will now hand it over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Ren. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining me for turning impact into investment. We're going to talk today about how you can storytell with your organization to drive funding. So let me get into it. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Emily Taylor, I'm principal of Teeny Big, and I help nonprofits get clarity, consistency, and confidence on their impact so that they can share it with others, and really help grow their organization through next level funding and finding new funders to really help them understand their work. I work with a wide variety of organizations, all sectors, but really kind of focusing on that small to medium size that's looking to level up their funding. So today we're going to cover a few of the bullet points that were in the presentation description. We're going to talk about the common pitfalls on nonprofit space when they tell their impact stories. We'll envision what's possible when you do have a story that's clear, consistent, and measurable. We'll reflect on your own organization's storytelling with a bit of a self-guided assessment. But you'll also have a takeaway that you can use to think about this after this presentation. And we'll also talk about how to combine data and narrative for a more compelling case and leave with some practical steps to strengthen your org's story. So I want to start with a statistic that you've probably heard a lot with storytelling, but stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. But stories only show the depth of your work. When you talk about one individual story within your mission, it really only shows a few individuals or however many you're sharing. But larger funders also want to know the breadth of their work. How do they know that this is happening across your organization? And that's the struggle when you're a growing nonprofit. When you have new funders, they want proof that your model is working and making an impact. But improving human lives is difficult to measure. And there's also been a recent study that only 28% of nonprofit leaders feel confident in their ability to communicate impact. So if you can see your organization making a difference, but funders don't necessarily see the urgency of your work because maybe your outcomes and impact are long-term. They can take years to really fully measure and understand. Your work might be unique or new, and your impact still needs clarity because you're solving a problem that no one's solved before. Or your impact is nuanced. It might be about changing people's minds, changing the actions people take, which is difficult to measure. So if you're frustrated with any of those things, you're definitely in the right place. So I'm going to do a quick poll of how confident you are in your ability to communicate your organization's impact to funders. So Ren, if you could pull up that poll. All right. Give you a few seconds to fill that out. So Ren, should I just hit the close?
If we're ready for that, that's fine if you see it. Otherwise, I can hit close and share out the responses.
Okay, I can't tell how many people have filled it out. So
we have about 72% of participants having voted. So if you want to contribute to the poll,
let's do it. Time is tight.
Okay.
Did that show up?
I'm showing the responses. If you can't see it, I will go ahead and read them out. So we have 4% of people polling at 1, 15% at 2, 55% at 3, 24% at 4, and 3% at 5.
Excellent. Well, that's pretty good. So I'm glad you guys really feel good about that, and we'll see if we can level up to some more 5s. So let me just share an example. An organization I work with called The Jar is a small nonprofit, under $1 million, with a vision to reduce segregation in Boston through the power of the arts. And they really saw this connection of equity, relationships, and art in their work to help achieve that vision. And what they would do is they bring together groups of diverse people. So people are supposed to come to these art events and bring people not like them, maybe that don't look like them, that don't have the same religion as them, don't have the same relationships as them, and bring them all together in the room. They experience a piece of art, and then they facilitate discussions to really help connect people and have deep conversations with people not like them. And I was lucky enough to, as part of this project, to attend one of these events, and they were really powerful. The room was filled with residents from every corner of the city, and people walked away changed. But funders wanted to know their impact, what's actually happening in these rooms. But they were a little stuck. They were tackling these big issues of segregation, loneliness, division, and they kept calling themselves experimental, but they really needed to clarify what that meant, what they were doing in order to really convince these larger funders that they were ready. They had great video stories, but it wasn't enough to prove their model was working beyond a few individuals. They also had theories about the impact they were making. They just didn't have the evidence. So it gets tricky because how do you measure connection and relationship building? They had these testimonials, but they didn't represent everybody. They also were tackling topics like reducing segregation that also has a lot of other effects that were happening around the city that they didn't have control of. Their mission also could mean different things to different people when they're talking about reducing segregation. It wasn't super clear about what that meant. But despite this difficulty, there weren't any other organizations bringing people together in this specific way, and they could really see something happening. Something was changing in a way that was helpful to their mission. And this is where I really want to tell organizations that you need to start asking yourselves, how do your constituents see the change you're making? Even if you're doing something with the environment that seems to not affect people, there are still people that see that change. And so what's that change that you're making? How big is that change you're making within, how important is it to those people? How widespread is the change you're making? How many people are really being affected in this way? And how might a funder help increase this change? And so to really answer these questions, you need to listen. And so my second poll here is, how often are you listening or gathering feedback about your organization's impact from your constituents within a year? So looking at none, 1 time a year, 2 times, 3, 4, or more. I don't know how often you're listening to the people that you serve or the people that are affected by your mission, and really gathering that feedback. So Ren, I'm gonna let me know when that's around a similar similar polling from last time.
Yep, we're at 58%. So again,
All right.
participants, if you would like to contribute to the poll, please do so. We'll keep it open for a couple more seconds.
All right, I'm going to close it.
Cool. So we have 18% with none, 33% with 1, 25% with 2, 10% with 3, and 14% with 4+.
Excellent. So it's good to see a lot of you are doing this. So let's talk a little bit about, show an example of how I do this work and how you can use that listening to really tell your stories. So I would say if you see your work making an impact, you know that you have an impact story. You just need to learn how to tell it. And so focusing on that constituent-centered impact is where I started with this project. We gathered stories of impact from constituents, the people that were attending these events, then developed mission-aligned constituent-centered impact language. That might sound like a lot of word jumble, but really it really is how do we define that impact in the language of the people that we're serving? And that allowed us to measure the impact in a way that made sense to them, that explained impacts in a way that they could identify as we were gathering that data through surveys and focus groups. And then we're able to share this information with funders, combining the stories and the numbers. So just an example, one of the attendees um, had lived in the city for a while and just saw a lot of the segregation and um, just had difficulty meeting other people from different parts of the city. And she said, if I hear somebody that says something and I'm like, I totally don't agree with that. Instead of getting angry, I just ask them a question like, tell me more about that. I want to know. And I think that part has come from the jar for sure. So this is a direct quote from a participant who attributes this change to the organization. And then we're able to go and measure that with a wider group of people to the point that 81% felt that their experiences with the jar helped them be more open-minded when interacting with people who are not like them, as a 5 or more on a scale of 1 to 10, which is huge. This is a really large percentage of people seeing their lives changed because of this work. So this gave them the opportunity to show the impact they were making and tell the story of how it supports their mission. And the benefits were, when they started, they couldn't clearly articulate their impact. They had narratives based on theoretical ideas that they thought how people were changing. And they also shifted their story depending on the funder. Now they're able to share their impacts based on real change. They're backed by stories participants shared to an objective viewer. They stay true to their mission no matter who they're seeking funding from. And some of the really cool benefits of this project is they were actually awarded 2 grants from the same funder because they knew their impacts, and their impacts fit into 2 categories that the funder had. And they were also recently awarded a $750,000 grant from the Mellon Foundation, almost doubling their annual funds. So I'm going to get into some of the pitfalls nonprofits face when telling the story of their impact to funders. And as I read through these, think about your own organization, because I'm going to ask you which one feels like the one that your organization struggles with the most. So sometimes there's pressure to prove the wrong impact. Sometimes, funders, there's expectations funders have, such as improving high school graduation rates when you serve young children, and you can't really necessarily claim that impact when it's part of so many factors in those kids' lives and might be super long term and not something you are actually allowed to measure to stay connected with those kids over time. So if you feel that pressure to prove an impact that you really can't attribute to your organization, this creates a disconnect between your work on the ground and the story that you're telling. There can also be complex work oversimplified. So if you're solving layered problems like poverty, housing insecurity, inequity, but there's pressure to distill it into funder-friendly sound bites, it can lead to funders not necessarily understanding the complexity of their work. If they're not in it, they might not really deeply understand the problems that your organization is facing. There's also pressure to prove, oh, sorry, hold on, I went the wrong way there. There's no standardized story across your organization. So maybe each person within your organization has a personal connection to your mission. And so your staff, your board members, your volunteers might tell different stories of your impact. And without a unified narrative, you could lose that consistency and credibility, which builds trust with funders. Another area might be data without context. So if you have a lot of action-oriented numbers, such as people served, meals delivered, workshops held, but you don't really know what has changed behind those numbers, funders can't see that impact. What's that context there? And lastly is reactive storytelling. If you wait till you need funding to piece your story together, you might be building different stories for different funders. Your stories might be incomplete and rushed and not really, you don't have that confidence behind them. So that will bring up this next poll is, which pitfall do you see your organization most facing? that the pressure to prove the wrong impact, complex work oversimplified, no standardized story across the organization, sharing data but not having the context, or reactive storytelling. All right, how are we doing, Ren?
I was just about to come off mute. So we're at 54%, 56% of people having voted. So again, participants, please, you'll have a couple more seconds to participate in this poll.
I know this one's a little more complicated, but you'll have in the workbook you'll have afterwards, you'll be able to think through these a little more. All right, I'm going to close it up.
Okay. So we have 3% of people at pressure to prove the wrong impact, 30% of people at complex work / oversimplified, 31% at no standardized story across the organization, 18% at data without context, and 19% at reactive storytelling.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, work can get so complicated. I love that the complex work oversimplified is really important because, well, and I'll share an example towards the end, but when your work, when you're so into your work and understand the challenges you face inside and out, it can be so hard to get that across to someone who has not been as embedded in your mission. Okay, so when it clicks, this means when you do have that clear, consistent story, it really helps drive funding because your impact's instantly clear. No matter who's listening, your story quickly communicates the difference you make and why it matters. It also helps that everyone shares that same story. From board members to the frontline staff, your team speaks with one voice, and this consistency builds credibility. And when your data and stories work together, your numbers back up your narrative brings your numbers to life, and this really makes your case both feel like an investment, but also memorable. And I also see this time and time again, when you're clear on your impact, your confidence shows. It shows in your tone, your body language, your materials, and funders pick up on that confidence. It really helps them build trust and invest in you. So when these things come together, it builds your capacity by letting your team and board members do more when it comes to fundraising. It's not just the fundraising team alone. It's really everybody that sees that impact and can express it anywhere they are. So I'm going to go through this self-assessment. Again, this will be in the worksheet that you can download, but I wanted to take a look through your own organization and see what you're doing well, or maybe might need work. So there's five areas I'm going to talk about here. The first is, am I bringing the full context of our work to funders? So this is, are you telling the whole story of the challenge you work on? And this goes back to that complex work oversimplified. Are there important details that others might not know? Something that's in a historical or systemic context, important data that might help someone understand the challenge, or current issues that are facing the community you serve that speak to the urgency of funding your work. So there's one example. I was working with an organization that was raising money for a building for women in domestic violence. And they were leaving out that if they had this building, they could help women within 1 hour of a call that they got about a domestic violence situation versus days, which was currently taking them because they had to get a hotel room and put some things in place before they can get that person out of that situation. And that's the difference of saving a life. It's an important detail that you can't assume someone might understand or know just by talking about it. The second one is, does our approach sound like everybody else's? And this is really important as you try to gain funding where there's some competition for it. There might be reading a lot of different proposals or have a lot of people calling them, asking for funding. So what is unique about your approach, process, or experience that makes your organization the best equipped for what you do? So just for an example, an organization that I worked with was was providing education to children, but there were a lot of organizations doing somewhat similar work. But their staff particularly had unique experience in supporting wraparound services for minority language learners. So by really highlighting the skill set along with the context of the need for the skill set in the community, it really left them the opportunity to be more memorable and focused with funders. Are we showing our work in action? This is actually where I find organizations doing the best, sharing, bringing people into the room. Are there examples, photos, quotes that can show what you're doing in action and, start to feel the difference your organization makes without really fully explaining all your programming. And in this one, I don't really have an example, but I always like to call out that, there's a lot of times you can't share photos because of safety and ethics, but being able to show the work that you're doing, maybe some prep work that goes into planning an event or preparing for a class, volunteers delivering to those in need, anything you can do that help people see what's happening. Number 4 is, can we clearly state our true impact? So if funders ask what's the impact of your work, can you answer that beyond just outcomes? So for example, shifting from attendees, how many attendees you had to your program, to you had a certain number of attendees and a certain percentage said they can articulate what changed, such as feeling very confident that they could call their local representative, or before they didn't. And then lastly, are you giving funders an opportunity to be part of the story? Rather than just asking if they can support you, being really clear about what you need. We need $125,000 to offer these impactful programs next year. Be one of our 5 $25,000 funders and help more kids like Gretchen, who presumably you would have shared that story, reach their full potential. So connecting that story to the ask and making it really clear how that funder can make more of this happen. So those 5 questions really layer onto the 5 elements that I use for storytelling: context, approach, action, impact, and opportunity. Like I said, the worksheet will have a little bit more about how you can apply that to your work, but I wanted to give you one more example of how to bring some of this to action. So Cobbled Streets is an organization that I recently worked with. They're a smaller organization, just under $1 million, with a mission to bring positive childhood experiences and enriching opportunities to children in foster and kinship. But funders didn't get it. They said, doesn't the state already provide for these kids? They're providing these positive experiences, but it seemed like a nice experience, not necessarily a need. And so we started this project with listening and really asking families, what changes have you seen in the lives of your foster kids based on these programs? How have these programs supported you to continue foster care? And what do people outside of foster care not understand about the challenges you and your kids face? And so we're able to take them through these 5 elements of storytelling and really build a strong story. I don't have time to go into all of it right now, so I just want to share impact, since this talk is about really showing your impact. And for this, it's about building a story and sharing the data behind it. So one of the stories that we heard from listening to people was a story about 2 kids who received bikes through this program. And, a bike might seem like a bike. It's a nice thing to have. But when we talked to this family, these kids had never had anything of their own. They got to have a discussion with their foster family about what kind of bike they wanted. They got to pick it out and choose a color, choose little decorations on it. They then were able to have a conversation with their kids about ownership. These kids had not really had anything of their own. They had to take care of these bikes. They had to lock them up. And so it allowed the family to really have that conversation. And it also allowed them to create memories. The family could now go on bike rides. They could ride bikes with other kids on their block. And so this was the power of what they were doing. And that story really shared that. So we were then able to ask all the people who participate in their programs, do you agree that your children's Cobbled Streets experiences help them bond with your family? And these statistics, I don't or not necessarily standard, but 100% of people agreed with that statement that we surveyed. And this really helps show that this is not just a one-off, that these kind of stories are happening throughout their work. So though this organization was able to go from, you know, funders not understanding the challenge, only sharing parts of their impact and too much information, truly now knowing the benefits of their work and being able to clarify it, have everyone in their organization tell the story. They have non-development staff pitching for grants, and their board is actively sharing these stories with local representatives. So as we wrap up, how can you share the depth and the breadth of your organization's impact to gain that next level funding? When you're seeking that higher level of funding, new funders with more investment level decisions, they want to know why your organization is the right one to fund. And there's a lot of organizations seeking that funding. They read a lot of proposals, and following the application rules or making cold calls will only get you so far. You need to really stand out. So if you can only do one thing, please, gather a few stories. It sounds like you guys are already doing this from individuals who have been impacted by your work. Figure out what impacts, big or small, do they have in common, and find one way you could use a survey to start measuring this impact in the next 4 weeks. It doesn't have to be huge. It just needs to start. And I want you to find the power in knowing funders can invest in this impact because you know it's happening. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. We're just going to open it up for a few minutes of any questions that people have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily. To all participants, if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat now. Slides will, yes, the two questions that I see so far are slides / this presentation. So if you are interested in receiving the recording and materials from today's workshop, you can download them on the bottom of our free webinar page tomorrow, or email us at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. But do we have any questions for our present? Okay, perfect. How can you tell a story for ongoing sustainability?
I'm trying to understand the question, if that is like environmental sustainability or just ongoing sustainability for your organization. I'm going to assume it's the latter. And Ren, if you have those links so people can download the worksheet I was telling about, that'd be awesome if you could pop those in.
Sending them now.
Yeah, so for long-term sustainability, I mean, I think that is your goal, but finding the argument within there, I mean, you can't, if you don't have long-term sustainability, you can't really do the work today either. You really, if you have those longer goals, like being able to connect that in the story, but I would break it apart a bit. So, you can make the argument for long-term sustainability. Like I said, without knowing your mission, I'm maybe rambling a bit here. But if I take the foster care example, I mean, they need to be there to support foster families. Even as foster kids move on, those families are still there taking on more foster kids. And so they really need to be thinking about, the foster care system is not going away. And so when they can make arguments for long-term sustainability, they can talk about the benefits of having really experienced foster families. They can talk about growing and sustaining their programs for 10, 20 years. It's really kind of about reframing that story so it includes the urgency of today and the necessity of sustainability for tomorrow. Big question, so hopefully that answered it a little bit.
Great. We had a lot of questions come in actually, and we are at time. So I'm going to extend it. If you have the time, we can answer one more.
Yeah, that's sure. And by all means, if anyone wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I can answer your questions directly there too.
Perfect. What's one question you've seen major donors respond exceptionally well to? One that helps them feel like true partners in creating impact.
I think the question from that funders would ask a nonprofit, is that how you understand it, Ren?
Um, I think it's what the nonprofit would ask the funders.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think a question a nonprofit would ask a funder. I'm so used to going the other way. But I would say, what change do they want to see happen in the world? I think coming in, I think the argument I'm making is coming in knowing your impact and really being confident in that and really helping a funder understand and invest in the work that you do, even if they're not quite sure what specifically how it fits with their work. So I would ask them, how much do you care about X, Y, or Z, which is the work that you do?
Perfect. Awesome. We are at time, so I'm going to go ahead and close us out. Please see those links that Emily was talking about in the chat. So thank you so much, Emily. This workshop has now come to a close. If you're interested in receiving the recording and materials from today's workshop, you can download them on the bottom of our free webinar page or email us at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. Thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you, Emily, for educating our community. All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.